Welcome to the Creating High Performance Athletes podcast. I'm your host, Olympian Jonathan Edwards. Let's get started. Hey everybody, it's Jonathan and welcome to another episode of the Raising High Performing Athletes podcast. A lot of cool stuff going on. It's NFL season, which gets me really excited. I'm a big NFL fan, but don't like the concussions. I still like all the athlete stuff. Don't like all the prima donna stuff like Antonio Brown and things like that. But today I wanted to talk about something really important. And what's kind of cool about it was I had this topic on the go, but then today on CNN, this article popped up about some hydration study in Scotland that was completely just got me angry. So one of the things that I want to talk about today is hydration and nutrition, and how what most people don't understand is that, well, I think a lot of people do understand this fundamentally, but most what we hear about nutrition and what we hear about hydration is primarily what gets to the press and what gets on the bookshelves and what gets into kind of our heads is driven by industry. Okay, so let me first start with hydration. So back in the 90s, like the 80s and into the 90s, Gatorade started. And the story about how Gatorade started, if you don't know it, it was the University of Florida football team. And the coach was like, he felt his guys were getting, their energy was going down, and he wished that there was something that he could give to his athletes so that we keep their energy up throughout the game. And sure enough, what they did was they basically got some research guys at the school to come up with some sort of drink, and they came up with basically a mix of sugar and salt, and then of course the next game they go out, they win. I think it might have been a national championship. They win, and they now all of a sudden it's births Gatorade basically. And so then what happened was the business side of Gatorade realized that, and sports drinks in general, I don't want to throw just Gatorade under this, but Gatorade was the first driver of all this, was that now they realized, God, the margins and it doesn't cost a lot to make this thing that we're going to sell for a couple bucks, right? It costs like pennies. So the margins were massive. And so it became a business. And what that business then drove was they drove research that basically created a situation. It proved that, oh my God, the body needs this product in order to succeed athletically. And that drove the entire sports drink industry. And so what we know, though, what was predicted back at the time, I think it was in 1991, was a doctor by the name of Dr. Tim Noakes, who's out of South Africa. He basically predicted that we're going to have deaths caused by athletes who are overhydrated. And so, sure enough, that's what, I'm going to fast forward here, that's what happened. Tragically, a woman died during a marathon a number of years ago, and actually it was 94, 95 was the first kind of death related to overhydration. But the story that, if you're a parent watching this, the story that we've been given, or that makes the media, is that oh my God, we need to drink. We need to drink. We need to drink. We need to drink. And you should drink before you're thirsty. And, it's gotten so insane that literally a couple weeks ago, I was at the airport, and actually it was a couple months ago now, but I was at the airport waiting to pick up my mom, who was flying in, and a school trip, right? A tour of like 20 school kids was being like, they were getting a tour of the airport, right? And I was in the baggage claim, and they come through, and every one of these kids, and they're probably like 8 years old or so, maybe probably about 8 years old. Every one of those kids had a water bottle. And I'm not talking like the airport gave them a water bottle. It's like they all came with some like fandangled Contigo bottle with, and the kids are like playing with the bottles and they're looking around, and I'm thinking like, holy smokes, like your kids are just walking through the airport. They don't need a water bottle. And so what's happening now for a lot of our athletes, especially athletes who play in the heat, is that we're so hyper concerned with water that that and hydration that we're actually missing the point. And what's happening, because a lot of these sports drinks have sugars in them, okay? We're now athletes who have been in sports that are the most enduring, like so whether it's triathlon or marathons or even rowers. Sir Stephen Redgrave out of the UK is a name that you might be unfamiliar with, but Stephen Redgrave is one of the greatest Olympic athletes of all times, and he was a rower for the UK, and he was like knighted by the Queen, has type 2 diabetes, right, later in life. And what we're finding is now there's a lot of athletes who were what you would think of was the pinnacle of health, right? Like they're running, they're doing amazing things, but they develop type 2 diabetes from the sugar in the sports drinks that they have been, I won't say forced, that's not the word, but they have been told to drink. And I lived this, right? Like you gotta have Gatorade. And then what ends up happening is that you become addicted to the sugar in the drink, and then you don't like the taste of water. Water doesn't taste as good, right? So what happens is our athletes are developing I want to call them secondary ailments because of what they're taking dietarily. And in the drink side of things, the sugar in the sports drinks is huge. And then the flip side of that is like, okay, there's a sports drink, but now it's sugar free. And then it's pumped full of like sucralose and aspartame and things that, like aspartame is like one molecule away from formaldehyde, right? You're better off drinking a Coke than a Diet Coke, right? But the hydration thing, and I want to steer you to a really funny clip. And I'll try to pull it up while I'm doing this, and maybe I'll try to type and talk at the same time. But Adam ruins everything, hydration, and I'll probably put the link. Everything, Adam ruins everything, hydration. There it is, hydration episode. I'm going to put this in the links, because what's happening, guys, is our athletes are because the science was driven by basically industry. Anytime a scientist takes money from an industry, their result is going to reinforce that industry, right? You have, like, you can't disagree with that. But now there's a number of doctors that have been working for like 30 years now. Like this isn't like new stuff, but it's just stuff that doesn't make the press because it doesn't really, it's confrontational, because there's a lot of people making money on the flip side of the conversation, and it's not coming through. But what my concern is that our athletes are getting sick, or they're going to get sick long term, because what they're doing in the name of sport. Okay, and so I don't want that to I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to try to post that in the group. I don't know if it'll come up. Let me see. There it is. Yeah, I just posted it onto the Facebook page, and so you'll be able to see that in the comments. Adam ruins everything hydration episode. You're going to have a laugh, but it's true. And the scientist who's in that episode, I'm actually going to interview here in the next couple months, which is really cool. So here's the thing. The hydration myth is really our thirst mechanism in our body is so finely tuned, okay, that we should be drinking when we're thirsty. Right? So your athlete should be drinking when they're thirsty. That's really the base of it. The idea that we need something outside of us has been so driven by industry that the original message has been lost. Okay. So what I want you to take from this is I'm going to steer you in the direction of a couple maybe resources that you haven't thought of before. One is Dr. Tim Noakes, Noakes, out of South Africa, and he actually wrote a book. It's a Kindle version called Waterlogged. And so if you have an athlete who is I want you to read that book. Okay, it's called Waterlogged. All right. Now, the flip side, on the nutrition side of things, what's really piqued my interest over the last like 9 months or so has, as I've gotten to learn more and more. One, I've been looking at my own body, right, and I want to, I want to, I want to lean out. I've become so infatuated with how big I was as an athlete, especially when I was bobsledding. To be honest, I was worried about getting skinny and lean because I don't want to be small, and that's really, it's kind of an interesting thing to kind of get your head around. But the doctors that I would like to share with you and is Dr. Stephen Phinney, Phinny, okay? Dr. Eric Westman out of Duke, okay? Dr. Michael Eades, Eades, all right? And I mentioned Dr. Noakes out of South Africa, and there's others. Dr. Volek out of Ohio State, Volek. So I have a project that I've got in the back of my head called nofatcoaches.com or no more fat coaches. I think that would be kind of cool because I don't like seeing fat coaches. I don't like seeing, because I realize like that coach is dealing with something. And because a coach influences so many kids, I think that if we can affect our coaches, we can affect our kids. And the discussion now, right now, there's a lot of pressure from the processed food industry. Okay. On the side of we're now there's tons of science that basically supports that there's too many carbohydrates in the diet, and that's driving insulin, and insulin drives fat storage. So basically, for the adult, I don't want to get too techy on you, but just bear with me here. If you're an adult and you're overweight, here's basically what we know now from science, is that insulin drives fat storage and also fat release, right? And so, but what the question is, well, what drives insulin? And the answer to that is carbohydrates. So carbohydrates is everything from the sugar that goes in your coffee to the sugar in a Pepsi or a Coke, to the potato at dinner, to the rice, flours, things like that, right? So there's so much science that reinforces that as we limit the carbohydrate in the diet, that the body shifts from looking for sugar for fuel to looking for fat for fuel. And what's fascinating now is there's stories of athletes in mostly endurance sports who are eating high fat, low carbohydrate. They're basically eating the reverse of what's done in the dietary food guidelines. And that's a whole nother story, and I'll get to that in a second. But the thing that struck me the most was when I started reading stories of athletes who had been super athletic their whole life, coming down with heart disease or coming down with type 2 diabetes. Like these are human. Now, granted, on the heart disease side of things, there are some like genetic influences. We know that, but we do know now that we can change what's called genetic expression through diet. And so my interest now has very much lied in the work that these doctors are doing and have been doing for 30 years, okay? This isn't new stuff. But basically what we're finding is that the science is there, but industry is now driving the food so much, and the whole that the food intake that we eat and the processed food that we eat, that those are all carbohydrates, right? Years ago, what caused all this was a fear of cholesterol. And there was a study done that basically said cholesterol causes heart disease. Well, what increases cholesterol? Well, it was fat. So fat got bastardized. And then what happens was in all the food product, they sucked all the food. Remember, fat-free this, fat-free that. You suck all the fat out of a food, right? You have to replace it with sugar for it to taste good at all, right? But the sugar drives the insulin. The insulin basically turns everybody into a fat store, like an incredibly good fat storage unit. But what we want to do is we want to unleash the fat. We want to release the fat. And athletes, what we now know is that fat when the body turns fat into fuel, it creates ketones, and ketones are a much more efficient fuel to burn than glucose is. And so I don't want to get too techie on you, but what I want you to know when we look at your athletes, right? You know, some sports, right? It's beneficial to have a couple extra pounds on you, right? Like my son's like talking to me the other day, we were watching some football, and he's like, dude, that guy weighs like 350 pounds, right? He's getting paid to weigh 350 pounds. I'm like, yeah, but if he doesn't lose it, you know, after he's done playing, he's going to have a lot of health issues. Conversely, you know, some athletes use sport as an excuse to eat, right? And as parents, we're kind of guilty of it too, right? We're like, oh, they'll just burn it off. Well, to a point, right? If an athlete's eating so much carbohydrate, well, they're going to put on weight. I look back on my Olympic experience, and I know Jeff Shire, who was my strength and conditioning coach at the time, is watching this. One of the things that back then, I had a real hard time putting on weight. And we used to, you know, have dinner in Europe, and then we'd all go to Claire, who was our team manager. We'd all get like $20 a piece, and we'd go to McDonald's. Well, what was I eating at McDonald's? Well, I was eating 20 chicken McNuggets, right? I was eating 3 cheeseburgers, an apple pie, and a large Coke. That was kind of my go-to meal when we were in Europe. I know, it's crazy. I think it's like 4,000 calories now that when I did the math. But I couldn't put on any weight. Hey guys, I had a little bit of a technical difficulty here, but I just wanted to kind of finish off by one of the things I found out today. I started this episode talking about an article that I saw on CNN that was actually published on this is September 26, 2019. And it's talking about how the title of it is "Which Drink is Best for Hydration? Hint, it isn't water." And it's written by this woman named Lisa Dreher, who's just a nutritionist, and she's an author and a CNN health and nutrition contributor, whatever that means. But as you dig through this article and you go through the study, what you find out is that the study that was done in Scotland, that was published in what is it, the academic.oup. So what is this? This is, sorry, I'm scrolling. The American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. Here's the problem with this. At the very bottom of this study, when you scroll and scroll and scroll, it says that they are sponsored, or that this study was funded by the European Hydration Institute. Sounds really official, right? Makes you think, interesting. The European Hydration Institute, pretty official. Here's the thing. Coca-Cola is one of the funders. So it says the giants of the health lobby is bankrolled by Coca-Cola. Who do you think wants to think that it's not good to drink water, it's better to drink something else? Coca-Cola. So you got to be careful when you hear things like this, when you see anything online, you got to dig. You know, my first question is like, who's funding this? Who wants to tell me this? Who wants to tell me that water's not good for you, right? And when you dig and dig and dig, then you see the true culprit, basically, right? And then unfortunately, when a study is funded by big corporations, you know that study is never going to make, you know, when anything comes out even slightly in their favor, which is questionable in this case, they're going to push it. And sure enough, this study was done in 2014, and we're 2019. So 5 years later, the study is all of a sudden coming up. Now, in the last 5 years, we've learned even more about hydration. So don't buy it. It's not a big deal. So sorry about the tech issues today. Listen, if you're hearing this and you want to learn more, come on over on Facebook at Raising High Performing Athletes. That's a group that I run over there, and also have this podcast. But if you know someone who needs to hear this, do me a favor, share it with them.